Hello and welcome to the Chop Shop. My name is Dion Tucker. Thank you for tuning in to the Black Trombone Chronicles. In this episode, we're going to talk to the great Tony Baker. He's a professor of trombone at the University of North Texas, as well as being a trombonist in the Dallas Opera Orchestra. Tony's going to share some of his knowledge and perspectives with us, so let's check it out.
But technology will not beat us tonight.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much, Tony, for coming on the second episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles. This is a little series I started on my Chop Shop channel. And thanks so much for coming on. We're going to be talking about the experience of the Black trombonist from Tony's perspective. And this is going to be great because this is all candid. This is our first time truly having a conversation. So I'm really looking forward to learning a lot from you and hearing about your journey as a trombonist in this music field here. So if you could start by telling us a little bit about where you grew up and how you wound up playing the trombone.
Well, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I did not come from a musical family at all. It was a very working class family, and it was a very weird idea, weird development to them when I came home in sixth grade after seeing some instruments that the middle school had brought by. And told them that I not only wanted to be in band, but that I wanted to be a trombone player. Well, let me tell you how I ended up getting in band and how I ended up on the trombone. So when I was 12 years old, I was a heavy kid, and I had some real self-esteem issues. For a lot of reasons. I didn't have a father around, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided that I needed to get good at something, but I didn't know what. So I considered academics, and I made good grades kind of without trying, but I didn't want to be considered a nerd. I was 12. What did I know? And I considered art. I was pretty good at that, but it didn't really hit me. And I considered athletics, but that didn't fire me up either. Then I thought about music, and I thought, well, I've always loved music. I sang in a church choir, and so I figured, okay, I'll be in band. Well, about the same time, the junior high band director was going to be bringing a bunch of instruments and some of his students to the school cafeteria to try to do some recruiting for the junior high band. And I thought, this is my opportunity. All right. So he gets the instruments in there, and I start looking around. And the first thing I look at is I look at the saxophones, and I think, nope, no, I can't do that. There's way too many keys on that thing. That must be the hardest instrument in the world to play, right? So
Right.
I wrote off the saxophone. Then I looked at the trumpets and baritones and tubas, and I thought, well, that's a little better. There's only 3 buttons on those, but still, that's probably a little bit more thinking than I want to do, right? And then I looked at the percussion instruments, and I thought, well, any idiot can play the percussion. You just hit stuff. Like I said, I was 12 years old. What did I? Nothing. And then I saw the trombone, and it was like the angelic voices started singing. I said, that's my instrument right there. It doesn't have any valves, any keys, no sticks that come with it. That has to be the easiest instrument in the world to learn.
Little did you know.
Of course, I figured out over time, and I'm embarrassed to say over more time than it should have taken, that the absence of keys and valves and all that other stuff was what made the trombone so hard. Thankfully, by that point, I had fallen in love with it, and I was practicing every single night. And I love my parents for so many reasons. My mother and my grandmother. But one of the reasons I love them most is because I can't believe they put up with me practicing until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night after doing my homework, after they themselves had been at work all day long. But they did. They never complained about it. So,
Yeah.
but that's how I ended up on the trombone. I kept playing through high school, and it just kind of got to a point where when it was time to go to college, there really was nothing else I wanted to consider doing other than music. And of course, here I am today, still doing it.
Wow, that's so interesting. The parallels that are in my story, because same thing with me. Nobody in my family played music. I had like one cousin that played a little piano, but I think he did it just because he was good at it. He didn't really have any interest in it. And my mom told me only recently that I was into sports, and I was also into martial arts when I was young. This is around the same age, about 11, 12 years old. And I was doing a taekwondo, and there was a music shop that was like a couple of doors down from where my taekwondo school was. And my mom said one day I walked by and there was a trombone in the window, and I was just looking at it, and I kept looking at it. And she said, you know what? I think I had started in middle school band by then. And I said, you know what? Can we get one of those? And she was like, this was back in the days of you could do rent to own, like from the music store. And so we went in, and she said that I told her, I can get a scholarship to go to college doing that. I can't get one doing taekwondo. Mm-hmm. So she said, all right, let's get the trombone. And that was she just said that the fact that I saw that, then she was like, all right, let's see what happens with this. But I think our parents saw that we were interested in something, and it was a way to keep a young Black man interested and focused in doing something. So we're just going to leave them to be doing that. I think that was a big part of it from my family, for sure.
I think that was a huge part of it for my family too, because I didn't grow up in the worst neighborhood in the world. I'm not going to sit here and act like people were getting shot every night, but people were getting shot. Stuff was getting broken into. There were homeless people, there were drug addicts, and they didn't have to worry about me because I would come home, I'd do my homework like they told me to, and I'd get right on the trombone. And in addition, there was a jazz radio station in, of all places, Little Rock, Arkansas. And so when I wasn't practicing band music or whatever it was I was spending time with, I would listen to that jazz station all night long with my trombone in my hand, and I try to catch little stuff as I heard it, and that was kind of how I spent those formative years in junior high. And I had a boom box with a cassette player in it, so I would record from the radio straight to the cassette, wore out cassettes, listening to jazz. Didn't even know what I was listening to. Yeah. I just knew that I loved it, and I just knew that if I worked hard enough on copying what I was hearing, I could kind of sort of do it too. So,
yeah. Was your music teacher African American, or did you have any influences of teachers or people in your family that played music that maybe inspired you to say, hey, I want to be a musician as I get older?
Well, I'll tell you, I didn't have an African-American music teacher until high school, but I did have a junior high band director who was really quite fantastic. He was a 60-year-old white guy. Well, I don't know that he was that old. He was at least in his mid-50s. Bald white guy, trombone player, played Dixieland trombone. And he realized right away that there was something going on with me and the trombone. So while he didn't specifically give me lessons, he did make sure that I got a little bit more attention than the other trombone students who were not practicing like I was. And so he made sure that he was always giving me some name to think about, some name to listen to, made sure that I was hearing him play on a regular basis, because that was extremely helpful, because he was just an incredible Dixieland trombone player. Now, I didn't really want to play Dixieland, but I certainly wanted to be able to do it. And so he was a real model for me very early on. Now my high school band director was an African American. He's actually still around. He teaches at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, a gentleman named John Graham. And he was the first African American music teacher I had. And it was so good to see somebody who looked like me, who was just as serious about music being more than a hobby. I mean, this is his career. This guy's paying his house note doing this. So it was really good to see his discipline, because he kept his horn on the stand in the office. He was an alto saxophone player. And I wouldn't say that he was a fantastic player, but he was a competent player. Competency was enough for me to see that this is a guy, if he had to do a professional engagement, he could do it, you know. And plus he was strict, and he pushed me, and when he needed to get under my skin a little bit or mess with my ego a little bit, he did that too. So it was, and you know, he did that the only way a black music teacher could, and I don't have to explain that, you know.
Yeah.
But it was, he was. I had two really fantastic band directors when I was in school, and I'm so thankful to the both of those gentlemen.
Yeah. This is crazy. Another parallel in my high school, our symphonic band director, I went to Performing Arts High School. His name was Dr. Roby George. He was also an African American alto sax player. Funny enough. And it was funny because he was the head of like the wind ensemble, but he was really kind of the head of the music department. You know, we focused a lot on the different, we had jazz band, which was like a whole nother thing from the classical department. But he made sure everybody was in order in all departments. So everybody really looked up to Dr. George. Same thing. He wasn't strict, but you never really tried to push his buttons. You know, you just knew where he stood, you know, and much like you said, it was a kind of love that we just knew, like, he really cared about us as students, not just as like these musicians who are excelling in their field, but just as people. You know, that was a big thing for me to see somebody like him in charge of everything without the title, you know, but just kind of commanding that presence through how he was. That was a big deal for me, for sure. Yeah. So as you started to go into higher education, or you started to make your way into, let's say, colleges and stuff like that, were you a jazz major or were you a classical major? Like, did that world, because you're a jack of all trades, I mean, you're a great trombone player, but there's not too many classical players that can say, yeah, I can play jazz and can really play jazz, you know? So talk to me a little bit about your higher education experience, and what was that like being a black trombonist?
Sure. In my undergrad, I was a music education major. I had every intention of becoming a high school band director, or at least a middle school band director, partly because of the influence of the two gentlemen that I just mentioned. But I wanted to be a band director who was also an incredible player. And so I not only practiced a great deal, I never said no to anything. So my trombone instruction was classical instruction because that's who the teacher was. He was a classical musician, so that's where my instruction was. I mean, I loved my undergraduate teacher, but I don't think he could have swung on a playground.
Yeah.
So he was a wonderful human being, dearly departed man. But classical is what he taught me, and classical was what I needed. I needed those fundamentals, but I just kind of had this mindset very early on that if it needed trombone, I was going to play in it. And so I played in the wind band, the wind ensemble, and I played in the jazz band, and I played in the Dixieland band, and I played in the trombone choir, and then I played in the brass quintet, and on and on and on and on. And there really wasn't anything I did that I didn't like doing. I just there was nothing that I did that I didn't like doing, and there was nothing that I did that I didn't want to do as well as I possibly could, so well that people would think that that's what I do, you know. And no one really taught me that. That was just kind of something that I kind of made a connection about, you know. And I don't want. I knew very early on I didn't want anyone assuming what I couldn't do. And if they did have the nerve to assume what I couldn't do, then I wanted to be able to prove them wrong very, very quickly. But from very early on, I just played everything. Obviously, as I progressed into my graduate work, I had to kind of specialize a little bit, and so I decided to major in performance. Not so much because I liked one more than the other. I just knew that there was some more actual work opportunity in one more than the other. You know, so I was a performance major for my graduate work, but I still played as much jazz as I possibly could get away with, while making sure to take care of business on the classical side too. In fact, during my second year of graduate work, I was a jazz TA, and at the University of Minnesota. Still a classical trombone major, but I just wanted. You know, you kind of said it earlier. You said just a trombone player. And that's how I've always thought of myself. I've never thought of myself as a classical trombone player. I've never thought of myself as a jazz trombone player or a this or a that. I'm just a trombone player. And so my goal, my job, my whatever you want to call it, is to be the kind of player who, no matter what situation you sit me in, it's going to be right. It's going to sound the way that it should. And I don't think that makes me any better or any worse than anybody else. That's just what I decided that for myself I needed. And it's been very beneficial to me in my career because I have a job where that's kind of what I'm expected to do and to be for the students to some degree.
Yeah. Now, it's very interesting what you're talking about. I wonder how much, because we know as Black people, we have to be that much better, you know, so that when we're in these situations, there is no question. So in the mindset of, you know, you're going back and forth between these different genres, you ultimately want to be the best that you can for yourself, because that's how you are as a musician. But was there anything in the back of your mind that kind of was like, okay, I'm going to be really good so that nobody, like you said, nobody has anything to say about it, but we kind of know, at least I know for myself, when I come into certain situations, say I'm one of the only African Americans in the band, in the back of my mind, it's like, don't mess up any rhythms. Make sure you're reading like as good as I'm going to do that anyway, but still that little stigma is there. So was any of that there as you were kind of going back and forth between genres and playing these different roles?
Well, let me be very clear about something. It wasn't in the back of my mind. It was front and center. I knew being there, being very often the only African American in whatever ensemble that I was in, that I'm already walking in with a target on me. I'm walking in the door being perceived to be someone who's less than, less able, less knowledgeable, less, put whatever adjective you want to after that. And so I figured out very early on that if I was going to have the same success as my white counterparts, I couldn't be just as good as my white counterparts. I couldn't be a little better than my white counterparts. I had to be a lot better to have to get the same respect and to have the same opportunities. And that was something that I figured out in my undergrad by watching. I'm here. I'm practicing sometimes 4 hours a day. I'm doing competitions. I'm doing. I'm doing it. I'm serious. And we have these auditions, and I end up in second chair. Because they have to cycle through their white male seniors to make sure that they all have a chance to sit first chair. I won a national competition in my junior year, but I wasn't first chair in the band until my senior year. So, it's like,
Yeah.
working here. And so I figured out very early on that one of two things is going to happen. Either I was going to be so good that they literally felt like they had no choice but to give me the opportunities, or I was going to be so good that if I still didn't get the opportunities, it would be really freaking obvious what was going on, so that it was just like everybody knows what's happening. And I've seen that play out not just as a student, but also as a professional too. When you have a white colleague who walks up to you and says, "Tony, I see what's going on. It's not cool." That I can't help but feel good about that, just because it's so clear. This is why you're not getting this opportunity, and we see it. And ultimately, you can't control what people do. People are going to do what they're going to do. All you have control over is your own actions. And so I just make sure that if I don't get an opportunity that I really want, that it has nothing to do with my abilities, that it has everything to do with how someone has chosen to or not to, award me that opportunity.
Yeah. It's just amazing to hear it, because as you say it, it just makes me think of all the things that maybe I didn't realize what was going on right at the time. Like it made me think about, particularly when I was in high school, I did one of these all-star band kind of things where everybody comes from around the country. We all met in New York, and we're there for 2 weeks. So a bunch of great players, a lot of which are professionals now, still on the scene. But both of the times that I did that band, I played bass trombone. That was the last time I played bass trombone in my life. So I have never had a bass trombone or been a bass trombone player, but both years I was on bass trombone. And at the time, I didn't really think about it until recently when I thought back. There was one year they expanded it to 5 players in the section, not just 4, because the person who was on 5th was really, really good too. But we were both on bass trombone, both the only 2 African American trombone players in the section. Yeah. Both of us played 4th and 5th trombone. And I think back on it, it was like, like of course I went with the flow. It was an amazing learning experience and all of that. But when you're younger, it might not be as clear. Once you hit that college and kind of start getting into the professional scene, things became a lot more clear for me, at least. And it sounds a similar case for you. Was there any times where your peers, the other musicians, because it can be one thing with maybe the conductor doesn't like it or the person in charge is feeling some type of way, but has there ever been a time where your peers and like your section mates or something where you just felt something was a little bit off, where you didn't feel like that support? And if so, how did you deal with that as a player? Did you just kind of put your head down and do what you had to do, or did you reach out and say, hey, try and have a conversation?
Well, let me tell you what my experience was, being in that sort of situation as a younger player. I tended to encounter two types of attitudes. One attitude was acknowledgement and appreciation of my work ethic and of my abilities and my skills as a leader, and et cetera, and real respect from my colleagues. And the other was visceral resentment at seeing how hard I work and how good I was, and there was very little middle ground. I either had buddies in the section who had my back and who were like, "Yeah, you the man," or others who were like, "You ain't as good as you think you are," and so for those people, I just like you just said, I just kind of kept my head down. And just did what I had to do. Meaning, I really made it clear through my actions. Look, I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to do what I got to do, and you can be okay with it. You can not be okay with it, but I am not going to be apologetic for being more serious about this than you. This is what I do. This is what I intend to do. And you can get on board with me or not, but you're not slowing me down. I'm not going to make your problem my problem. Having some years on me now, I can certainly see some times when a little bit of reaching out might have been a positive thing to do, might have helped smooth things over. But I didn't do that because I grew up in the South, and when you grow up in the South, and when you feel like as a young Black striving musician, you got to fight for everything that you get. The diplomacy is not one of those things that you learn, at least not early on. And you don't learn that because you realize that diplomacy is a wasted skill with so many of the people who are working against you and detracting from you. And so I did not have the kind of diplomacy very early on in my college years that maybe I should have had. Now, thankfully, I learned it. I figured it out once I got out of the South, and once I got into situations where really most of the people just cared about, how good does he play, how hard does he work, how reliable is he, how easy is he to work with. But early on, I knew that for far too many of the people that I had to deal with, none of that mattered. This was what mattered, And so anything that felt apologetic to me, I abhorred it. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't have to talk sense into you. I just have to be better than you. And again, looking back on it, I can certainly see times when I could have put my ego just a little bit to the side, not behind me, but just scooted to the side a little bit and just talked with someone. But
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's a funny game we have to play sometimes, I remember a situation where I was doing a Broadway show, and we actually had a little pool going of like who missed notes. If anybody missed something, you got to buy the section of drink.
yeah.
So I was determined to not have to buy anybody anything for this entire run. So I didn't miss any notes. I was never late. I was never anything even close. But the conductor just had a thing for me for whatever reason. He just had this thing. And I knew it wasn't because my performance wasn't good. I knew my performance was above, where it should have been. But for whatever reason, the conductor just never spoke to me. Now, we could be walking in the pit literally this close, and he would not acknowledge me, And I took the high road. It was around Christmas time, brought him a gift, all these little things that I didn't know. I was like, a gift? What? No, give the conductor all these little things. I did that, and it didn't work. It was still the same vibe for no reason. I could see if I messed up if I did, but there was really no reason. So that experience kind of messed with me in the sense of like, well, what am I going to do this for if people might not be receptive to it? At the same time, as I got a little bit older, I kind of realized you can't change what you are because of what somebody else is, and it really made me do things because I genuinely wanted to do it, not because, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. People give such and such gift. It's like, no, if I don't feel that person is deserving of that respect from me, then you're not going to get it. And I'll feel better about myself afterwards, knowing that I took the path that I know I should have taken instead of the, proper political path. Sometimes it's just so interesting how we have to toe these lines. And I know it's, especially in the classical world, I know that that's a thing, that you have to deal with. I wanted to ask a little bit about when you were doing auditions to get in. Currently, you're in, is it the Dallas Symphony that you're currently in?
I'm in the Dallas Opera Orchestra right now.
Okay. Okay. When you were doing auditions in the past or even now, were they blind auditions or not?
Most of the time they were blind auditions. Which there's been some debate about blind auditions in recent months. I'm a big believer in blind auditions because I can definitely think of a job or two that I would not have gotten had I not gotten through that blind audition round.
Yeah.
Had that blind audition round not been there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, there were blind auditions.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Because I know sometimes, just being a jazz musician, going to these different venues, sometimes like just when I walk in the venue for the sound check and people don't know who you are, it's like one of those "can I help yous," not like "can I help you," like "what are you doing here? Can I help you?" Kind of thing. So I just wonder what it's like being in that type of situation all the time, where there's an expectation of who's supposed to walk through the door, and then you walk through the door, and it's like, oh, okay. After a while, people are generally accepting, but I've been in situations where it's just like the "what are you doing here" kind of thing. I can imagine that happens in the classical world a fair amount.
It's a funny thing. I've been in the Dallas Fort Worth area for well, this is my 21st year living here, which seems crazy to me. But this is I'm in year 21 right now, so I've been here long enough that everybody knows who I am. And when I walk through most doors in the area, there's going to be enough people who know who I am and who know me. I'm guaranteed that there are going to be some people who are happy to see me, some people who put their stuff down to come and say hello, that sort of thing. But it never fails. There's always one or two people who you can see it in their look, the look on their face. How'd he get in here? What's this about?
Yeah.
Is there jazz on this concert?
Yeah.
So there's always one or two. It never fails. You can see it on their face. What's he doing here? Now, I can let that get under my skin, like I used to, because it certainly used to get under my skin. Or I can focus on the people who are happy to see me and who know what to expect and who have high expectations of me and who are glad, sincerely glad that I'm there. And so that's what I do. I focus on those people and I tell myself, Tony, do a great job for those people who are glad you're here and who want you here. And don't worry about those,
Yeah. I know what you mean. I was fortunate enough to be on TV for a couple of years with Harry Connick Jr. He had a daytime TV show. And one of the things I kind of realized early on was that, this is a little different situation than just playing a concert and then, maybe there being a couple thousand people there or something like that. Like, people are seeing me every day in their living room, and here I am as a young African-American man representing our instrument. I felt like I was representing the entire race when I was on this show, but it was important to me if there was some young person that happened to turn on the show and see me there playing the trombone, like, what do I represent as what is it that I want them to see coming from me? So I think that the way that you explain that in being who you are and letting people see what it is you are is the ultimate road to take, because we can get, fed up and caught up in all of these feelings. But the approach that you explained is, I definitely think that's the way to go, because when it's time to play music, like, all bets are off, like, when it's time to play, it's time to play. And either you can or you can't, your skin color is not going to matter at that point. And everybody who's a musician knows that. And I think sometimes people who aren't African-American might feel like, well, yeah, that guy is a lot better than me, but I'm here because of, maybe some politics behind the situation, so there is that rub there. I definitely think so. Speaking of politics, it's just kind of crazy to not mention here in 2020 as we do this interview. We're in an interesting state of being as far as, the world goes politically. How do you feel that that's affected you? I mean, we're in the middle of this pandemic. We can't play with people. We can't, we're finding different ways to reinvent ourselves and for people to kind of still see what it is we're doing. How do you feel that this current state that we're in has affected you as an African-American trombonist?
Well, I guess for me, it's a tough question to answer, because I don't think it would be entirely honest to say that I'm not affected as an African American musician to some degree, because I think I am. I think if anything, the way that it has affected me is that it has impressed upon me just how important it is for me to defend my own agency, you know, um, and just really, how do I put this? I for most of my career, I have not really made it a point to represent myself as a black man, in my career. Meaning, I'm just a trombone player. I'm not here to be a black trombone player. I'm just a
Right.
trombone player. All right. But there's a part of me that feels like uh, the people that I work closely with, or people that I don't work closely with, need to understand that there is a place I stand, and they need to understand that I don't think it's okay what's going on politically in this country. They need to understand that, yeah, I have an opinion about the police. I have an opinion about what's going on in the world. Um, and I guess I want them to know that, because I want them to think before they speak to me. Just to make sure that it's clear. Here's where I stand. I'm not here to be on a soapbox, but here's where I stand, and I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about the fact that I'm a black man and that I'm proud of who I am, and that I am not indifferent to what's going on, that I have an opinion about it, and that just because I'm nice and respectful to you doesn't mean that I'm okay with what's going on. I'm nice and respectful to you because you're nice and respectful to me. But if at any point you decide you don't have to be nice and respectful to me, I'm not going to be nice and respectful to you. And thankfully, over the last few years, I've only had a couple of interactions that weren't nice and respectful, for, dealing with people who thought there was a certain thing they could mention or say around me, and then discovered, ooh, I can't say that to him. I can't say that around him. I kind of poked a hornet's nest a little bit,
Yeah.
So I guess that's how it's affected me. Just in me feeling it necessary at times to make it very clear. I have an opinion. I'm not indifferent, and the fact that I'm black, it is a thing to me. Just because I'm not always doing the stereotypical thing
Right.
that they expect us to do, it doesn't
Right.
mean that I'm indifferent to my own race and to my own heritage. I just choose not to put it front and center when I'm here to do a job. But if you put me in a position where I have to put it front and center, I will put it front and center.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes total sense, because I think, a lot of us, as we were talking about earlier, we're towing this line, and it's kind of, we know how to be a certain way in whatever situation it is that we're in. We understand which way to act, and we can morph into all these different things.
Yeah.
I think recently, though, when I say recently, within the last couple of years, there has been a resurgence of black pride amongst musicians. It's not just a, hey, I'm black and I can play some blues kind of thing. It's a much deeper understanding of, I think every generation kind of goes through their own thing. You know, in the 50s and 60s, they were going through something and it came out in their music. I think what's going on now, it's our time. You know, we're going through something, and a lot of the pride, I think, has come back to a lot of the musicians and understanding, like, hey, this is what we come from, you know, and we have a story and we have ways to tell our story that isn't through your lens.
Yes.
And that's really a big part of the reason why we're sitting down having this conversation right now, because I've never heard these kind of stories talked about openly. You know, there are things we talk about, you know, over catering or something like that. I remember a time, whatever, but, you know, 9 times out of 10, you really don't hear these kind of perspectives. And I think it's important for people to know that we do, like, if you're saying something on the side and we overhear it, like, don't be upset if I come and say something to you about it.
Yeah.
Because if the role was reversed, it would be the same way, and we would be looked at like, what kind of person is this? Get them out of here. You know, like, you can't be as comfortable as people have been in the past. People were really comfortable, and I can only imagine in Texas, you know, like, being places like this. Yeah, you're a musician and all of that, but you're still a Black man, and I would imagine that people are going to view you a certain way just because of your geographical location.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
like, you still have to we still have to deal with these things. It's crazy living in the New York area where things are relatively liberal, and I will say people up north do a good job of masking their different issues. They do. It's less prevalent in the South. You know, they have
It's there.
yeah,
They
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely there. But anytime I leave New York and I go somewhere else, it's like, wow, like, what year is this? It feels like it's 20, 30 years behind in certain places, you know? So it's just like it's a really interesting thing that we have to navigate through based on our geography, based on our position, based on the genre of music we're playing. You know, you walk in, there's all these different roles that we have to play essentially. Let me ask you one last question. What advice would you give to an up and coming trombonist that may have to find themselves navigating through these different fields in this time of social media and this and that? There's a little different things than 20 years ago. You know, things are a little different, but they're the same, as we know. So what advice would you give to, you know, a young up and coming trombonist and how to help navigate through the music scene?
Um, I would, well, that there would be a few pieces of advice. In no particular order. One, be better than you have to be. Um, and when I say better, I mean in every way. Be a better player than you think you have to be to work in the scene. Be a better sight reader than you think is necessary. Practice more than you think is necessary. Just uh, strive for excellence. And I know that that's a very general sort of thing that you'd want to tell any young player, but for us, for young players like us, it is even more important that they are striving to be at the top of their game, because it just makes it too easy to be written off when you're not at the top of your game all the time. Um, be be the most reliable professional that can be called. Don't show up late. Don't show up not wearing the right stuff. Don't show up without the necessary equipment. Just be so impeccably professional that you're actually being the model for everybody else. Uh, George Roberts used to love to say, keep your mouth shut and play your ass off. And that's advice that I give to all of my students, but especially my students of color. You don't have to say anything if it's so clear that you should be there, that it just, people just come to acknowledge, okay, he should be here, you know.
Yep.
But even with all that advice being said, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself if it's necessary to stand up for yourself. And if you have to lose a little bit of work from somebody because you've made it clear that you expect to be respected, then they're not worth working for anyway. And you and I both, I'm sure, have been in situations where we've had to say sayonara to somebody that we work for because they had it in their mind that they perhaps did not need to respect us as much as they respected the other musicians. So, work that you get for which you have to sacrifice a little bit of self-respect is not work that's worth having. So maintain your dignity. And if you are among the best at what you do, you're going to end up working for people who will appreciate that. Everywhere that I've ever lived, as far as metropolitan areas, there's always been one or two contractors who would never hire me, you know. Always at least one or two, even here in the Dallas Fort Worth area. And so I can fixate about those one or two contractors, or I can do such a damn good job for those contractors that do hire me that it doesn't matter that those people aren't hiring me, because I know that I can count on work from these people. And of course, you know as well as I do, because of your connection to those people, other people are going to hire you too. Well, if so-and-so thinks he's good enough to hire, then I ought to be hiring him too. And so I'm rambling a little bit, but work your ass off, be as good as you can possibly be a consummate professional, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. That's what I would say.
Yeah, all of those points I can second every one of those. It's so true. Whenever I go to a job, every job is serious. Every job is an opportunity for me to show people who I am, you know, and I think it's really important we establish early on who we are. You know, I remember people that I went to college with and their habits in college, and I still judge them based off of their habits in college. You know, it's like, know that sometimes, like, that's the impression that people have of you. It might be their first impression of you, but it might be the biggest impression of you. You know, so you always want that impression to be something positive. And like you said, being reliable. I know that when I walk into a room, people know what they're going to get. There's no question of, is this guy going to play in tune? Is he going to have his mutes? Is he going to be on time? No, those questions are not even there, you know. And if I would add, like, save up your mistakes, you know, there's always a time where we might get stuck or something like that, but save that for like a time when you really, really need it. If you can ever avoid it, there's nothing wrong with being there first. There's nothing wrong with being early. Like, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. So, you know, make sure your reputation precedes you, for sure. And I think you will work. I think there is space, like you said. If people see that you're serious and they see your work ethic, they see your output, you know, and the way that you sound and the way, ultimately, that is what will draw people to want to be around you, you know. So that's great advice. And Tony, everything that you've shared has been just amazing. I'm really happy that we did this, and I was able to sit down and get a chance to know about you, what your experiences are, where you come from, and really, I know a lot about where you're going. I know that you will always be one of the top cats in your field. So I appreciate you sharing all of your amazing wisdom with the audience.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. When you first emailed that you were going to be doing this, my first thought was, yeah, I need to talk to him. I want to talk to him. By my own admission, I have tended to be very ensconced in my job, so I do what I do at UNT, and I do it well, but I have not always been the best about talking to people outside of Dallas Fort Worth, especially fellow Black trombone players, so I'm so glad that you and I got to talk, and I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope that something that I've said tonight is going to be helpful to somebody.
Yes, I know it will. I know it will. And I want to thank everybody that's tuned in to this episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles with the great Tony Baker. And we'll talk again. I mean, I don't know why this has to be the last one. It wasn't. So we'll definitely get back on and see where we're at in the future. But in the meantime, I thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge. I really, really appreciate it. And I know the audience out there will appreciate it as well.
Thank you so much, Dion. I appreciate it.
All right. It's a pleasure talking to you, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, then.
All right. Stay safe.
I want to thank Tony for sharing his time and knowledge with us. And I want to thank all of you for watching the video. If you haven't done so yet, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next time at the Chop Shop.